Hi, here.
Oh, hello. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. So, I have two questions about Vikings. So, my first one was, what was your biggest challenge on playing your character? And my second question was, how was preparing the fight scenes for Vikings? How long does it take? Do you do your own stunts?
Okay, so the biggest challenge was undoubtedly the weather conditions. We shot in Ireland for 5 years, and when the show started becoming quite successful globally, they decided that they would extend the seasons from 10 episode seasons to 20 episode seasons with a break in between, which meant that we were filming in Ireland for 11 months out of the year. Particularly in the winter, it's not a very welcoming climate. It's raining a lot of the time, and it's quite cold. So in the wardrobe, I have no idea how the real Vikings did it, because it was just painful to be out there for 10 minutes, let alone 10 months. And we'd be out in the water. And it would be pouring rain, and we'd be hiding under our shields and then shoot a scene. And if you had to go to the bathroom, you hop on a boat and you go to the nearest island. It wasn't for divas, and so that was a challenge in itself. It was also probably one of the greatest experiences I'll ever have, and I suspect it'll probably be the hardest I've ever and will ever experience on a shoot. Just purely because of the length of time we had to sustain something like that. And your next question was, sorry, about...
the preparation for the fight scenes.
Oh yeah, so the fight sequences, so I do all the stunts that I can. Like, for insurance reasons, there's certain things that they just won't let us do that is understandable. Like, there was this one sequence in season 4 where you think Bjorn gets killed. He gets shot in the neck with an arrow, and he does like this. He falls off this boat off of a cliff for like 20 feet into the water. I really wanted to do that, but they wouldn't let me. But we have an amazing stunt coordinator, and we have an incredible stunt team that are just unbelievable. We'll train usually 2 weeks to a month before a fight sequence. What makes this difference from a lot of other fight sequences that you'll do, though, is that there's a lot of things you can't predict when you're rehearsing for a sequence that involves thousands of people. We had more extras than they had on Braveheart for some of the sequences, and you can't rehearse for that. You basically, at the end of the day, you run into a big scene and you just start hitting whatever's close to you, and you hope that you make it out. Usually you leave with some scrapes and bruises, but it really makes for some really interesting television and a super fun experience. You really feel like you're in it. But for the most part, we'd be training, except for those big battle scenes, we'd be rehearsing a lot of these sequences. But on the day, you always have to adapt to the environment where you're filming. So if we rehearse a scene and then suddenly we realize that the sequence won't be able to work because there's certain props or there's certain things in the way, you just adapt to that. And usually we rehearse a lot bigger of a sequence than what makes it into the cut, specifically for time purposes. But it was an amazing experience, and I was so glad to be a part of it. And it's crazy. I've been off the show now for probably coming on 2 years, and the last season is premiering in December. So it feels like a lifetime ago that I was a part of that show, which is crazy to say because as far as everyone else is concerned, it's still happening, and it still will be for another 2 years. So it's amazing. It was the greatest opportunity I've ever had.
There was a specific scene that was hard for you to film?
Yeah, there was one that I'll never forget, and it was, again, purely because, the show takes an emotional toll just because there's a lot of there's a lot of it's a very, it's life or death, so the stakes are really high from an acting perspective. You really have to come prepared, and you usually go home pretty drained. But the hardest one for me was, again, just a physical experience. We were filming in a place called Childers Woods when I was doing spoiler alert, when I was doing the Blood Eagle scene of King Ayla after he killed my father. It doesn't look that cold, but that day it was snowing and raining, and we had maybe 2 heaters, but like I really felt like my fingers were in so much pain just holding onto this cold knife, and we were out there the entire day and that's the difference. Is like, I'm from Canada, I'm used to the cold, but it's usually a dry cold. In Ireland it's very wet, so it gets into your bones. So that was definitely the hardest day of filming I think I've ever had. I shot a World War II film in Canada, and that's a very close second, because we were in the snow for that too, but yeah, they were really tough. Thank you.
Hi, welcome. How was
thank you.
the preparation for your role? Did you read or saw anything about Vikings? How was it?
Yeah, the majority of my research came from just sitting down and speaking with our historian, Justin, who works really closely with our writer, Michael Hurst, and just listening to all the knowledge he's accumulated about the Vikings over the years. And then Gustav Skarsgård, who plays Floki, and I, who's one of my best friends, we lived together for most of my time on the show. We made a trip out to Iceland and went to the places where the Njál sagas took place, and where a lot of the stories kind of have come from. So, and then we also met another historian there, and we talked a lot in depth with him. So, I'd like to think that I have a pretty in-depth knowledge of the Viking culture now, but there's still so much more. And they've talked about doing a spin-off of the show, which to me it makes perfect sense, because there's just so many other great stories that can be told. I mean, we've really only scratched the surface in terms of how much history there is there, and I'm so proud of the show because it takes a culture that was so villainized amongst the world, and it humanizes it in a way that hadn't been done before. I don't think. I think there was this huge resurgence of interest in the culture, and I'm so proud to have been a small part of that.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Do you have any interest story or something that happened during the filming of Vikings that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, sure. I'll tell you a funny story. So, like, one of my closest friends, as well as Travis Fimmel, who plays my father, and we used to prank each other all the time. It was relentless. I mean, relentless, every single day. And finally, I had just had enough of the getting pushed around, and I wouldn't recommend doing this to anyone because it's just terrible. But one day we were filming out in the woods, and he went into a porta potty, and one of the extras turned to me and was like, "Alexander, now's your chance." I was like, "You're damn right it is." And I ran over and I just kicked the porta potty over when he was inside of it, and he came out just going, oh my god, and it smelled terrible, and it was awful, and I'm so happy I did it.
Awesome, thank you.
I got one.
Hi.
Hi. So after Travis left the show, after Ragnar died, some of the critics about the new season were kind of negative, saying that it changed a lot and it wasn't the same. I kind of shared those thoughts, not necessarily thinking that the show became bad or anything, it just changed. Do you feel that after Travis left, the weight of the show rested on yours and maybe Catherine's shoulders?
Yeah, honestly, because I felt the same way, and I think that it was kind of an unfair transition because, and it was no fault of. Oh, is that? Oh. It was no fault of anybody's. It's just the way it happened. But the show, I think, truthfully, this is my honest opinion, was I think nobody expected the show to be nearly as successful as it was. So when the show had started out, they focused purely on that one character, and he was the sole lead of the show. And when you carry that for like 3 or 4 seasons, to then branch out and make the show about an ensemble as opposed to just one specific person, it's taking a huge liberty. That being said, there was no other choice. It's the way that it had to go. It's just that I think if they knew it was going to be as big as it was, they definitely would have introduced the other brothers earlier in the show, so that it was a lot more seamless transition. Whereas in this way, there was a 10-year leap, and it was a huge, it was a lot of faith that we asked of the audience to stay invested. Now, luckily, the audience did know my character from the beginning, and they did know Catherine's character. But I do think that given the knowledge now of how big the show was and how big it became, certain things would have changed, certainly in the way they set up the show to begin with. You know, like in Game of Thrones, not drawing any comparisons because they're 2 totally different shows, but there is a comparison in you know, just maybe in the tone. You lose the lead of the show in the first season, but you've already been introduced to all these other characters. So it's easy for you to move on from that because you know that there's a life beyond that lead. But Travis in himself is such a formidable force, and he's an incredible actor. But because it was so central on him, not just for one season, but for multiple, it was a huge ask. And what's crazy about that, and I didn't think for a second we would survive past that. Because I was just like, you know, I was so grateful to be a part of the show, and I love the show as a fan of it. But I saw that as a fan, that, you know, this was Ragnar's show. It was all about his legend. What's crazy was that the viewership ended up going up after that, and I only equate that because the show had just become more popular, not because, you know, Travis. I don't believe there would have been a show without Travis and without everything that they brought to the show. But it's really interesting you brought that up, and I share that same view with you. But I was so pleasantly surprised to find out that the fans still were loyal enough to the show and still believe that there could be a life beyond it. It was about the whole culture, and it worked. And I think it definitely could have been done better, but for some reason it ended up working. You know, we made it to 6 seasons, and then finally it came to the point where I felt I had done everything I could in this role. Travis had felt he had done everything he could in his role, and everybody got to a point where and Michael had fully achieved what he wanted to in telling every story, and that's why we ended it when we did. And I'm just so grateful for the experience. Yeah, and I'm so grateful for the fans and the people who love it and continue to support the series and the show. It's remarkable to have seen that.
Hi.
Thank you.
Hi, Alexander.
Hi.
Hi. After all this action experience with the Vikings, what is next for you? Another action project, maybe superhero movies? Do you like to do something like that?
I want to tell just great stories. So I'm developing a project right now with a pretty big network that I'm really, really proud of, that I can't speak about yet. I hope I'll be able to speak about it soon. I filmed a movie with Will Smith and Martin Lawrence called Bad Boys for Life, which I'm really excited about. I grew up watching those films, so being a part of that was just surreal for me. I have a film called Midway that I did with an amazing director named Roland Emmerich. That's going to come out in January, which I'm really proud of. I'm about to go shoot a film next month. And I shot a Netflix film in Guam. So, you know, it's amazing. This is the first year of my life where I really felt that, you know, as an actor, it's a weird career. You live a life of rejection. And this has really been the first year of my life where I'm like, wow, I can really do this really for a living for the rest of my life if things keep going. You know, and I owe a lot of that to Vikings and everything and all the amazing opportunities it's given me.
Hi. In season 5, Bjorn has many partners trainers. So how do you learn them? You asked Travis, you saw...
The mannerisms?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so Travis and I actually lived together too for quite a long time, and it's one thing we talked a lot about is that sons emulate their fathers, and I wanted to show that Björn was his own person and his own character, but he also had qualities that he admired about his father that ends up becoming a part of his character. You know, especially with somebody that you look up to so much, that I think that there are similarities you can draw. One thing I was really happy to see is that a lot of the fans said that they loved seeing when those little quirks would come out that reminded them of his father, you know, and I was really proud. I worked really hard with Travis on being able to start showing that as the character grew up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Já não temos tempo para mais questões, vamos ter que dar por terminada a nossa conferência. Obrigado a todos.
Yeah.